everybody, this is Canadian here. I just want to talk about the Plasmatech spec for Vanguards here, and I think there's probably an audience that are curious about the class, and there's also some others that would like to learn a bit more. And I think there's a bit of a gap in the market right now where not a lot of people are talking about the class, and there's no guides coming out, and I think people are still crunching numbers on what's effective and not. So I figured I'd put a video out there, maybe just to help others, or maybe get some discussion going, and maybe there's some others that are maybe thinking some of the same things I am, and maybe it would be nice just to hear some confirmation on that as well. So I'll talk about utilities, the baked goodies that are in the spec as well that I feel are really good for PvP. And maybe talk about a little bit about gear and maybe some numbers as well as far as like targets you want to hit. So I'll talk about some of the talents here and the utilities and this is just PvP focused here. For PvE, you probably wouldn't want to listen to anything I have to say. I haven't raided in a couple of years, or I just do veteran flashpoints and the odd master one here and there. So yeah, for PvE, yeah, you don't want to listen to me, but for PvP, that's pretty much all I do. So I could probably offer some insight there. So I'll cover the utilities here first. So these are the talents I've landed on for now as being my kind of go-tos. This is just a kind of a general PvP build that I use. If you're going to be doing something like a little more arena focused, that'll be a lot more nuanced in what some of your choices are going to be here. And for what I've done, I've kind of put a lot of focus on mobility, because personally I find that's the most effective way of handling PvP. It's just if I'm a lot more mobile than the other person, so it basically means that nobody can run away from me. I can run down anyone and kill them. And it also means that when I need to get away, nobody's really going to catch me if I really need to get away. So for me, that's just kind of one of those intangibles that it doesn't directly do damage like at face value, but because it's that X factor where it gives you better quality of life so that you can deal better damage, if that makes sense. So some of the utilities I've picked here, Iron Will. Really, the big reason I'm using this one is to reduce the cooldown and hold the line, because that is just such a good cooldown for Vanguards. It gives you really high mobility, especially when you take some utilities that are in conjunction with it. But it also gives you like some protection as well, so people can't root you or snare you and then just basically walk away because you can't catch up. So it's a really, really good cooldown. And just the extra 30 seconds off your tenacity there. It's kind of some just cherry on top. It's nice. So the next one here, the combat stims. Pretty much this one's going to be proccing like crazy. Commandos have this one too, and it's also like a no-brainer for PvP. But pretty much when you're getting tunneled, or just sometimes even peripherally, if you get CC'd somehow with like a root or a stun or soft CC, whatever. This thing procs, so means that your next ability gets 10% more damage, which is really good actually for something that's going to be proccing a lot. And it also means you could be pretty careless with your ammo here. It doesn't matter too much because this thing's going to top you off. Whereas in PvE you have to be very careful of making sure you're like putting in auto shots and whatnot to make sure you don't overheat or run out of ammo. But with this thing, you can almost like ignore ammo for the most part. You just occasionally, if you're not getting hit, just need to make sure you're not going to run out of ammo. But for the most part, you can just mindlessly spam nuke and you're going to be fine. So it's a really good choice. So this next one here, reflective armor, you might see some good usage out of this because there's some classes that just toss out AoE a lot right now. So for example, like lightning sorks are pretty popular, and they're just doing a lot of chain cleaves and whatnot. So if they're within 10 meters, which is actually a fair distance, this will proc, or engineering snipers is another example. They throw out a lot of AoE, so your mileage will vary on this one. Now, I personally don't take this one ever for PvP. And the simple reason being is the way I see it is I'm actively trying not to proc this thing. So basically, I don't want to be that DPS who stands in fire. So if there's AoE flying out there that I don't have to stand in, like if I can still deal damage and not stand in it, I'm not going to stand in it. Um, so for me, I didn't see this getting a lot of use, but for some other people, if they expect to take a lot of AoE damage, this might actually be a decent pick. So entangling tools here, this one for me is a strong choice. You don't necessarily need to have it because you do have some other options for snares, being Plasmatech. But the thing I really like about this though is the 50% snare on Neural Jolt, which is basically your taunt. So it's off the global cooldown, which is nice, and it's something I like to fire off when I'm at range and I need to catch up to someone. So a good example is I'm trying to chase down a Sork healer or DPS, it doesn't matter, and they use their sprint and get away from me. If I don't have like a cooldown up that can bridge the gap, like my grapple or my charge, for example, or my hold the lines off the cooldown, then I'll hit them with my Neural Jolt from a distance, so at least when they're trying to move away from me, they can't get as far, and I can usually catch up at that point. So it's just a kind of a nice snare that you can use off the global cooldown, but it's a completely optional talent. There's some other choices you actually have in this tier that you could go with that would also be a really good choice. You don't have to pick the ones I did in this tier necessarily, because you do have flexibility with the Vanguard utilities here that you could really tailor to your kind of playstyle. Okay, so this next one, Containment Tactics. I personally never use this one, but you could make an argument for taking it, and the reason being is your Cryo Grenade is basically your longer stun, the one that only works single target. It brings it down to 45 seconds, which is the same cooldown as your AoE stun, so if you frequently want to do a bunch of damage and then hit that person with 2 consecutive stuns, you would probably find some good use out of this talent. But for me, I find I have to give up something I like better just to use this, and I don't necessarily need it, I find most of the time, so someone else might get some more mileage out of it. Okay, so Accelerated Reel. So basically, this is bad unless you're using the tactical that gives you 2 harpoons, because you have to give up something way better just to use this. So unless you're using the tactical for 2 harpoons, you would never pick this. Explosive Surge damage increase. This is strictly PvE, because again, it's something for PvP purposes. You would have to give up something better just to be able to use it, and you're not spamming Explosive Surge in PvP all that often. It's usually you're going to be using some other buttons that cause a lot more damage before you ever hit Explosive Surge, so you're not going to see this get too much use. But again, if you're the kind of player that just mouth breathes on the keyboard, and you might get some mileage out of this. So the next one, Muzzle Augs. This is more of just a PvE thing. Really, it's just to get like that extra meter on the Explosive Surge. The extra 2 meters on just Ion Pulse is kind of weird because you use that for an extra a little further away, but then you have to get close for everything else. So it's just like, okay, that doesn't make sense. So that one, yeah, I don't think anyone's ever going to need to use that one. So that's it for that tier. So the next tier, you definitely have a lot of flexibility on for what you want to do, and you can tailor this to your playstyle here. But these 3 ones are the ones I've landed on. I'll explain why and maybe go over some of the other talents I didn't choose for this build. So Electro Shield is kind of just a nice damage boost thing to have. Now Reactive Shield for Vanguard lasts 15 seconds. So if you're looking at getting tunneled and then you pop your shield and it lasts the entire duration, and somebody was beating on you the whole time, so if your Reactive Shield does its max damage, you're looking around 40k damage neighborhood, maybe 45k damage at the very most. So it's not nothing. It's actually pretty decent. So out of all your choices here, if you're just looking for something that gives you like flat damage boost, that's your choice. So the Battlefield Training one that just gives you flat out 15% extra movement speed, you could give this up in favor of some other things. if you needed to. I personally just like, I don't have any supporting tactiles for like for my like harpoon, for example, so I might want a talent like this, strategic supremacy, that works with my harpoon. I might drop the movement just for that, because the harpoon will cover like a little route and pull things to you more often, so it's like the extra mobility isn't as important. Um, but yeah, that battlefield training is an optional talent. You can decide if you like it or not. So frontline defense, I'd say this is a bad one for PvP, just for the simple reason that you have to give up something way better just to use this. So I don't see anyone taking this one, but if it works for you, okay, good. Now Sonic Rebounder is something in 5.0. I never used it, honestly, for PvP, just because like I needed to use other things that I felt were more important. But now that the utility tree's changed a bit, so now there's only 3 tiers, it feels like you got some more choices now. And something I like about this now is there's a lot of classes, like let's take Deception Assassins, for example, where they have a pretty strong burst opener. And this is actually, if you can time things right, if you can get a Reflect in that really critical timing window where they do all their bursts, that's actually kind of nice. So I find I'm getting more mileage out of this now than I did in a previous patch. So it's actually been pretty nice. I've been very happy running it now. I don't mind giving up some other things just to have it. So Smothering Slag. This one's actually a really strong snare. That 75% snare is for 15 seconds. That's great. If you get that off in a group of people, man, you're gonna cause people to start blowing cooldowns just to get out of dodge here, because it lasts so long. The 30-second, you can't occur more than once every 30 seconds, so that one kind of sucks. So just for that reason, you basically find yourself holding Flak Shell for moments where you think you might need it, and it kind of sucks when you blow it, and then just like you blow it on like a Sork or something just to try to stop them from running. Then they use their sprint boost away, and the snare is gone, and it's just like, well, I can't do that for another 30 seconds. So your mileage may vary on this one a little bit. I mentioned it earlier, but strategic supremacy here. If you're running a harpoon-based build, then you're definitely going to pick this one, because it immobilizes your target for 3 seconds. So when you pull them in, you can do a little bit of damage first, and they can't get away from you. And then, when that 3 seconds is up, you'd probably hit them either with like your shock strike if you're running with pull and pummel, because that'll stun them, or if you don't have you can still shock strike them just to root them again, so they can't get away, or you can stun them so they can't get away from you. So he basically has some control options, which is why I mentioned it, because if you're going to be able to control your opponent more, you don't need the movement speed as much. But personally, I wouldn't go with a harpoon build. I don't know if it's any good, but just on paper it doesn't seem like it would be. So next one, Paralytic Augs here. So I don't think this is worth taking, just because you probably have to give up something that's more useful. It basically, if you were to chain CC someone with your 2 stuns, it would just, between the 2 of them, just only give you an extra 1.5 seconds, which isn't too strong. So it's just 1 more global cooldown, so it's not that good. So if you're going to be running a build where you need to stun lock people for a little bit longer, you might get some use out of this one. Efficient tools. Now this one is actually a very strong choice, and I'll explain why. But just to talk about the utility here first, the stun break on Adrenaline Rush is actually really good for Plasmatechs, just because Plasmatechs have a utility baked into the spec that basically every time you get hit, it reduces the cooldown on your Adrenaline Rush. So it means that you have a second CC breaker that is on a pretty short cooldown if you're getting hit a lot. So it's kind of a nice thing to have, and also with the talent that's baked into just picking Plasmatech, your Adrenaline Rush when it's active reduces your damage by 30%, which is actually really good. So you'll find when this thing does proc, like when you're about to die and this thing procs, it actually does extend your life a lot. So it gives, if you have a healer with you, it gives you like a better chance of getting healed, or just maybe living long enough to pull some move off that, you know, lets you survive, or you manage to kill the other person or whatever. It does extend your life, so it's kind of a nice thing to have if you roll Plasmatech. Tactics might not see as much use out of this one, but for Plasmatech it's definitely a good choice. Now, something else that's actually really nice about this talent that, yeah, on paper doesn't seem like it would be good, but the extra 10 meters on your harpoon here is actually really strong. And the reason being is that you can actually pull someone from a really long distance away. Like, if you haven't actually tried this utility before, give it a go, and you'll be really surprised at how far away you can pull people. And trust me, the people you're pulling are just as surprised as you are at how far they got pulled, because you can actually put someone in an arena, for an example, in like a checkmate style move immediately in the first global cooldown you use in the fight, because you can pull them from so far away right into the middle of your group there, and you just blow them up. So you know, it's actually really strong. You know, the extra 10 meters on shoulder cannon, like, who gives a shit? But yeah, this is actually a good pick. Alright, so the next tier, you do have some flexibility as well, and it's based on how you want to play. I want to say right now, Power Focus is probably just a mandatory talent now for Vanguards, just because, at least in PvP, because it's so good. So just to talk about it a bit here is when you're it's your new defensive cooldown you get in the expansion here called Power Yield. It's on a pretty short cooldown. It's 1 minute, and when you get up to your full 5 stacks, you basically have 10% extra damage. Now it's kind of nice because dots do proc this thing, so if you're running up against a dot class, it doesn't take long, and you're going to be at 10% extra damage pretty quickly. But the utility here makes it so that when you get hit, it extends the duration. So it basically means you have, if you're getting hit, even occasionally, just to keep the 5 stacks going, it means you have like 10% damage for 30 seconds, which is actually really good. And of course, your armor is going to be through the roof as well, so your damage reduction is going to be pretty high there. So it actually does give you a noticeably higher level of survival than what Vanguard used to have at 5.0. So it's actually a really good cooldown now with this utility. It's a button worth pushing for most cases. So guard cannon here, this is something that pretty much sucks. Like, I can't even say if it's worth picking up, even if you get that kind of trash Vanguard set built around like giving you like a 75% chance to launch an additional shoulder missile. So I mean, even then, if like, assuming you get like, I think it's like 7 additional shoulder missiles will fire, if you're going tactics spec. So it's like, it's not nothing, but even then it's such a niche thing that, yeah, it's just this passive, just, I don't know, this utility just really sucks. I don't think anyone's ever going to want to use it. So advance the line increases your duration to hold the line. This is really important one to take in my build anyway, just because I mentioned earlier why hold the line was pretty good for Vanguards, but I'm also using charge the line as well, which increases the movement speed by 45% while hold the line is active. And dude, like, you turn into like Sonic the Hedgehog when you pop hold the line. It's fucking great. Like, no one can catch you, no one can get away from you, and in some situations it's really strong. Like if you're in Void Star, for example, like, you can because when people are in combat, they walk at a particularly slow rate, and if you pop your hold the line and like take off and run the full 10 seconds at 45% extra run speed, dude, it's like you get so far ahead that you can just go tap a door and no one's going to be able to catch you. So for me, I find this is a really strong talent, being able to run around super quick. But this is for my playstyle. You might find in an arena you don't need that so much. You might want to look at some other options, or if you're going with like a harpoon build, you're going to want to use pull and grapple. So you'd be looking at maybe dropping something. If you were going with a harpoon build, you'd probably be dropping charge the line. You may not need the extra mobility. Okay, so what else we got? Aim extensions. You know, you kind of have to give up something better just to use this. You could make an argument, I suppose, if you're using the tactical that gives you like that AoE cleave on like basically all your attacks. You know, this would mean that you could do all of that from a distance if you pick this, which, you know, doesn't sound bad, but you can still do all that damage close up. You don't have to be at range. So I don't see this as like a necessary talent, just kind of more of a gimmicky one. But if people won't think they can make it work into a really good spec, well, try it, see how it goes. Now I've mentioned the harpoon build a couple times. Pull and pummel. I was actually using this when I was tactics spec back in 5.0. And I thought this was a really good choice because it gave you like an extra stun. And you know, since survivability was such a problem for vanguards, that I felt having as many stuns as possible, just so they couldn't deal damage to me, was like the only way I could survive. So you would probably find stronger options now, like for example, like the power focus utility is definitely way better than pull and pummel is. But yeah, if you're running harpoon, you're definitely gonna want to take this one. So, re-energizers, that's just bad. It's just PvE only. I wouldn't even talk about it. Battering Blitz here, you know, it sounds like it'd be something that's really good for PvP, but when you actually try it, you know, like, your charge there is basically, it bugs out occasionally, so, like, if you pick this talent and then it bugs out on you, and then you try it again and it bugs out again, it's just like, well, this utility's worthless, but, yeah, I couldn't actually find a good reason for taking this. I just found it really wasn't worth it. Usually you would charge at someone and that was enough. You didn't have to charge a second time, or you know, if they got away from you a second time, you could pull them to you or use or hold the line to catch up. So like you had options, so you didn't need it. Oh, that's great. Disconnect. Alright, so just to look at the actual talent tree for Plasmatech here, I'll just go over the talents in this tree really quick here. There's a couple that are worth discussing and some other ones that just like, you know, it doesn't need to be discussed, you know, just free damage kind of thing. So Shock Strike is a really good ability. Does a little kinetic damage and does a little bit of elemental on the tail end of it as well. Later there's a talent that will root your target in place, which for PvP is really strong. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. So next one here, basically just free damage. Next one here, that's the one where it roots Shock Strike for 2 seconds. Now, something with Plasmatech is it's a bit difficult to wield because your Ion Wave, that cone, there's a chance it can misfire. Like you might just flat out miss aiming it correctly in PvP, which, you know, it's pretty easy to do with people running around, or people get knocked back and then your whole ability misses. So there is going to be like a certain element of you just can't avoid it, you're just going to miss. But something that you can do that actually really helps it is if you Shock Strike them before you use your Ion Wave, that just roots them in place, so it makes it really difficult for them to avoid getting hit. So that way it's a reliable way. So you may find, like, yeah, it may not be an optimal way of using Shock Strike in your, like, the optimal burst kind of rotation, but it stops them from moving, which sometimes is more important. So for me, I tend to layer. If it's a target that's trying to avoid me, I Shock Strike them first and then hit them with Ion Wave, just so I know they can't get away from it and I can always hit them. Okay, so next one, just free damage. And one nice aspect here about this passive is reduces all your damage by all the period, so all the dot damage you take by 30 seconds. That's baked into the spec. So Tactics doesn't have that. So a couple classes right now that are doing some pretty insane dot damage, like Vigilance, Guardians. You've got some dot spec operatives are running around cleaving everybody with like really boosted dots now, and they're hitting really hard. So this is kind of a nice protection to have. So year round, one of your core abilities in your spec. Cell Generator, just free damage. Alright, Insulated Dogs, just basically, it's kind of nice to have just some elemental and internal damage reduction for PvP. Just any kind of damage reduction, always good. Activating Shock Strike makes your next high impact bolt an automatical, sorry, that's not even a word, automatic critical hit. Let's see. Oh yeah, this is worth talking about here. So Pulse Generator here, so basically when you get it up to 2 stacks, 80% snare on all the targets that get hit for 3 seconds, and 80% snare, that's really strong in PvP. That's just almost as good as rooting someone because they can't move at all. So if you can hit anyone with an 80% snare, that's really good. And it's also rotational as well. Like, you don't have to think about it. It's automatic. It's just part of doing your normal damage rotation. And any kind of snare you get where in PvP for any class where you just automatically apply some kind of CC, like even like something as small as a snare, as part of your normal damage rotation is strong. So Plasma Flare, part of your burst there. It's a really good ability. Does all elemental damage, so it ignores things like armor, which is nice. Rain of Fire. Yeah, this is a bit of a pain in the ass to work with, just because your cone AoE, your ion, what is it called? Ion wave is supposed to like spread your dot, but it's because the cone is like so narrow, like it doesn't always spread it the way you hope it does. It would be nice if we had some kind of 360-degree option for spreading dots, but for now that's kind of what we're stuck with. Alright, so just something that increases damage, just free damage, whatever. I did talk about this one earlier, but just then again, this is a really good passive just because of the damage reduction when it does proc, like 30%. That's a lot. And every time you get hit, it reduces your adrenaline rush by 6 seconds. So that's actually a really strong passive. And Tactics doesn't have anything good like that. Next one. Oh, okay. Free damage. Okay, Plasmatize. Yeah, it's a dot. Not that interesting, but something that is really cool to talk about, though. I don't think a lot of people know about it because you never saw anyone using Plasmatech before in PvP. But if you kill someone with this dot, it does jump to someone else. But something you may not know about is that if you kill someone and there's a stealther on the other team standing nearby that is in stealth, this dot will jump to them. So it will reveal them, and they're going to pop out of stealth, and you're going to be just as surprised as they are that they're suddenly not in stealth and on fire. So yeah, if you're playing a stealth class and you didn't know that, don't stand next to or around anyone that's about to die, because you're about to eat a dot and pull you out of stealth. Now, actually mentioning stealth classes too, something about this dot is if you are about to die, and you have one more button you can push, and you can deal some damage to a stealth class, put this dot on them, plasmatize them. The reason being is this is a 30-second dot, and I guarantee you there is no other thing you can do to a stealth class that is more fucking annoying than a 30-second dot, because they feel incredibly vulnerable when they're not in stealth. So if they just have this obnoxious probe, like vomiting fire all over them, it's just like painting a giant sign like stealth class right here. So it's incredibly annoying. So you're definitely going to ruin someone's day if you do that. A stealth class day, you will piss on their cornflakes just by throwing this 30-second dot up. And for operatives and assassins right now being so strong with their burst coming out of stealth, if you can keep them out of stealth for 30 seconds, that is super fucking annoying. Like, they will not like you. So that's a really important thing you can do. So if you gotta die, you only got one more button you can push before you die, and there's a stealth class there, hit them with this. That's the best possible use of that last global cooldown you could do. If there isn't a dot or a stealth class around, whatever, it doesn't matter so much. It's still nice. It still does a lot of damage in that 30 seconds. It does take 30 seconds, but for one global cooldown, that's a lot of damage. So next one, basically free damage. Next after that, free damage. And then, yeah, just pretty much more free damage. So just basically really the things I wanted to talk about for the talents and utilities here. I'll move on to maybe gearing and some more about that.